Og det er noget af det, som jeg synes, der er det mest interessante ved den her nye digitale yuan, det er, at den kan kodes og programmeres. Og hvis man tænker på det sådan rent pengepolitisk, så er det jo helt vildt at forestille sig, hvad man kan gøre som centralbank, når man har de her digitale penge. Så ligesom danskerne har fået deres feriepenge på forskud og så videre, så kan vi jo ikke rigtig være sikre på, hvad danskerne bruger de penge til. Nu har den kinesiske regering og den kinesiske centralbank muligheden for at sige til kineserne, hvis de vil stimulere økonomien i en bestemt retning, så kan de gøre det. Og det synes jeg er ret interessant. Der er meget stor uenighed blandt eksperter rundt omkring om, hvorvidt det her det kommer til at disrupte US dollars position som den vigtigste reservevaluta i verden. Men jeg tror, at de fleste kan se, at det kommer til at disrupte SWIFT-systemet. Som vi lige hørte i det foregående oplæg, så er der store problemer, i særligt en masse udviklingslande, og det her med, at det tager flere dage nogle gange at lave den her transaktion cross-border. Det koster nogle høje gebyrer, og med den her digitale yuan, så bliver det på sigt muligt at handle cross-border, og så er det med et fingerknip stort set, altså lynhurtigt og stort set gratis. Der bliver måske en lille bitte fee. Den har også de features, som der blev talt om før, som er ret innovative. Blandt andet det, at du kan holde 2 telefoner sammen, og så kan du overføre den offline. Så der er ingen tvivl om, at det her det handler rigtig meget om innovation. Det handler rigtig meget for Kina om at være først for en gangs skyld på et område. Som I sikkert ved, så er Kinas tech-giganter som Ant Group, som har været en del af Alibaba Group, de er jo fuldstændig førende inden for fintech, men det er en position, som Kina gerne vil blive ved med at bevare, og derfor er det her med finansielle services, som kan blive en afledt effekt af de digitale penge, det er super vigtigt for Kina, og man tror, det kan være en kæmpe konkurrencefordel på sigt. Men altså, bare lige for at tage måden, man gør det på, det er centralbanken, der udsteder de her penge, det er bankerne, der distribuerer dem, og der er mange, der siger sådan, men det er fordi den kinesiske regering er nervøs for, at Alipay har fået så stor, magt og så stor viden over kinesiske forbrugere, og den kinesiske regering vil have mere kontrol, og derfor så vil de lave en konkurrent til Alipay og WeChat Pay. Men det er faktisk helt forkert. Det handler om, at det er simpelthen selve pengene, der bliver digitale, og Alipay vil stadigvæk være den digitale pengepunkt, mange vil bruge, når de shopper på Alibabas platforme osv. Der kan godt være en lille snas af det her med, at det er lidt bekymrende for den kinesiske regering, at Alibaba Group, som har en masse forskellige platforme, hvor kineserne bruger Alipay, de har deres eget kreditvurderingssystemer og alverdens ting, de ved sindssygt meget om kineserne. Hvad de køber, og deres præferencer, hvad de mener, og hvad de tænker osv. Så der er selvfølgelig en snas af det her med, at nu får den kinesiske regering mere kontrol, i hvert fald over at se, hvad folk køber, og hvordan de bruger deres penge. I forhold til de officielle forklaringer på, hvorfor Kina lancerer den her digitale yuan, nu har jeg ikke sagt, hvornår de gør det. Den har været i pilotprojekter, som sagt sidste år. Man har lige rullet det ud i en kæmpe by som Shanghai i et pilotprojekt, og man forventer, at den vil blive lanceret officielt inden OL i Beijing, vinter-OL her i 2022. Så det bliver lidt spændende at se, hvornår det præcis sker, men det er meget tæt på. Og den officielle forklaring handler om, at man selvfølgelig vil bekæmpe hvidvask, korruption, skattesvindel. En af de features, der bliver, som jeg forstår det, det bliver, at når man for eksempel skal handle sammen som virksomhed eller privatperson til virksomhed, og der er nogle skatter og afgifter, som skal betales, alle de der systemer, de bliver også digitaliseret, og det betyder, at det altså ikke er op til ens egen samvittighed, eller at man kan sidde og lave fiksfakserier, men at det simpelthen sker helt automatisk, at de her ting, de kommer til at gå fuldstændig efter den compliance, som der skal være, og det vil gøre det lettere for myndighederne at kontrollere den slags. Det handler også om overvågning, som jeg allerede har været inde på, at det er selvfølgelig kærkomment for en autoritær stat, at den har endnu mere kontrol over, hvad folk køber og hvordan de bruger deres penge. Der er mange menneskerettighedsorganisationer, som selvfølgelig frygter, at dem, der er dissidenter eller demokratiforkæmper, eller på anden vis er en trussel mod regimet, at de kan få store problemer, fordi deres pengestrømme kan blive fuldstændig afskåret. Men Der vil jeg sige, det kan den kinesiske regering allerede gøre i dag, hvis de vil, fordi de 4 store statsbanker osv., altså regeringen er så magtfuld, så jeg tvivler på, at det vil have den store forskel med de systemer, man allerede har i dag, og den kontrol og det jerngreb, man allerede holder dissidenter i Kina i dag. Jeg har allerede nævnt det her med finansielle services, at det er, altså der er mange nye muligheder, der åbner sig, når man først har den her digitale valuta. Og der er også store forventninger til, at det her det kan give Kina en konkurrencefordel, også i forhold til, at man gerne vil have rullet den her renminbi eller yuan ud i hele verden, og det er jo ingen hemmelighed, at det ikke er gået så godt. Altså det er jo noget, den kinesiske regering har ønsket i mange år, at renminbi skulle blive en reservevaluta, og det er ikke rigtig sket. Men tilsyneladende, fordi det her cross-border handel bliver så meget lettere og så meget billigere, så er forventningen, at den kinesiske vicecentralbankchef har faktisk lige udtalt, at den digitale yuan skal ikke erstatte US dollar. Det er en helt naturlig udvikling, at yuan kommer til at fylde mere i verden, og vi synes, at vi skal lade markedet bestemme. Og det han mener, det er, at hvis det bliver så attraktivt, som Ulrik også nævnte, hvis teknologien er så attraktivt, at folk vil simpelthen vælge den her løsning, fordi den er smart og fordi den er billig, jamen så kan det jo give Kina en meget stor konkurrencefordel. Bare lige det sidste billede, jeg har med her, det er sådan et kort over Kinas digitale fodspor i forvejen rundt omkring i verden. Så hvis man sådan rent geopolitisk tænker, det tør vi i hvert fald ikke i europæiske virksomheder, eller vi tør slet ikke at bruge den her centralbankstyrede valuta fra Kina. Det vil vores virksomheder afstå sig fra, fordi risikoen er for høj, og det er et spørgsmål om tillid osv. Hvis man kigger på det her landkort, så kan man jo se, at alle de grønne områder, det er steder, hvor kinesiske virksomheder bygger 5G, smart cities og telekom og alle mulige ting, som også er højt, altså som også er sikkerhedspolitik. Så det kan godt være, at vi i Europa er meget tilbageholdende selvfølgelig med det her. Jeg kan sagtens se, at der er en masse udfordringer i det, men der vil være rigtig mange lande rundt omkring i verden, hvor man bare tænker, det er smart, det er billigt, det gør vi. Og kineserne slår selv meget på inklusion, altså det her med, at fattige mennesker i et afrikansk land på sigt vil kunne stå med en mobiltelefon i hånden, og så kunne købe sig en del af en kinesisk statsobligation, sådan her. Det er de ting, som der sådan er perspektivet i fremtiden, at man simpelthen vil kunne inkludere også mennesker, som ikke, 1,6 milliarder mennesker, som ikke har en bankforbindelse i dag. Så der er mange aspekter af det her, men vi kan måske diskutere de sikkerhedspolitiske perspektiver bagefter. Det tænker jeg, der sikkert er spørgsmål til. Og i forhold til privacy concerns, så kan jeg sige, at den kinesiske regering siger, at deres valuta, den er controllable anonymous. Det vil sige kontrolleret anonym kan man være, og det er jo ikke så betryggende. Tak for ordet.
Tusind tak skal du have. Thank you very much, Christina, for highlighting what is happening in China, and the Olympics in Beijing will be something that we should follow also because of the overall sort of now digital currency. Now we move to London, to Ed Bowles. I already introduced you at the beginning of our conversation. Thank you very much for participating in this webinar. Very grateful about that. You could say that what's happening there is another attempt to create a new payment system driven by 26 members of the private sector. And that project has also sort of attracted quite some attention, one will have to say. I saw a number of people have referred to the DM Association as a wake-up call for ECB and national European banks. So obviously the question to you, my first question would be, why does the world need this? Why is it necessary to launch such a project? Over to you.
Thank you very much for, firstly, the opportunity to join your forum today. I think I got the gist of the last presentation, definitely, and agreed with very much what Christina was saying. And I sort of got the gist of what some of the other colleagues were saying, but my Danish, I'm afraid, is not so great. So look, Facebook, it may surprise you to know that Facebook is no stranger to payments to start with. We have 2.6 billion active daily users. We have 26 different payment uses across our various platforms. And last year we processed something in the order of $100 billion of total payments volume through our various payments products. So this is not a new thing for us to get into. What is new is, I think, the opportunity that we're seeing, and indeed the need, I would say, for a new payment system to tackle the iniquities of the remittance market in particular. For your listeners and observers, they may be aware that there are about 1.7 billion people on this planet who basically have no bank accounts and no direct access to financial institutions. But about 1 billion of those do have mobile phones. Now, Denmark has a GDP that's about $350 billion. It's basically about the same GDP as the Philippines. The difference is Denmark GDP depends almost to no extent on remittances, i.e. from Danish or other nationals sent from abroad to Denmark. There's we think about $1 billion is sent from abroad to Denmark. For the Philippines, it's 10% of GDP. So a population of 106 million people receive something like $36 billion from remittances from Filipino family members working overseas. They are facing charges of anywhere between 5 and 10% for each of those transactions. Now, if you think about the amount of money that Danish citizens send abroad, which is about $1.7 billion, or in Danish kroner, about 6.1 billion kroner, for those sent to non-EU residents, if you're applying a 7.5% charge to that, that's 462 million Danish kroner that is not sitting in the pockets of the person sending the money or the people receiving it, but it's going to an intermediary. And what we're seeking to do here is to bring competition to that, to bring those charges down to as close to zero or zero as possible. And it's not just us that are trying to do this. The Financial Stability Board met in March, on the 29th of March, and has sought to engage the private sector participants who are currently the incumbents in that market to bring down their charges. And it proposed a target of trying to reach 3% charges by 2030. And what was astonishing was that in that meeting, some of those incumbents felt sufficiently confident of the lack of competition to be able to say there should not be any targets to reduce current costs in the remittance market, which for us, frankly, says all that you need to hear about the need for competition. And what we're trying to do is to say, here is a payments platform that has been constructed with all of the concerns that the governor outlined in terms of KYC, money laundering, etc., using blockchain technology, which could deliver payments very quickly and very cheaply to people who need it. And that is, in a sense, the core use case that we're seeking to bring to the table, and which we as a global player can do, but are doing it very much in accordance with the concerns that are expressed by public sector, such as the governor, in terms of the public policy criteria that need to be addressed as we build the system.
So this is about competition.
Well, it's about absolutely competition in an area where there is inadequate competition and where there is rent extraction in pure economic terms from a very vulnerable and disenfranchised segment of the global population. That is the core use case that drives our innovation and our intervention in this space. There are many other use cases that you could think of, but this is the one that very much lies at the heart of our initiative.
And how far has the initiative developed? I mean, when will we see DM dollar?
Well, we hope before very long. As you know, the initial white paper was published in June 2019. We, as a group of organizations, obviously received a number of inputs and reactions to that paper. A revised white paper was published in April 2020. And, you know, the DM Association is engaging with regulators and others, and it's very much for them. And I can't speak for the DM Association. I can only speak for Facebook and our Novi wallet, which will be the operator on that blockchain. You know, we're very much hoping to see that go live sometime later this year.
And what about the fear with regards to monetary stability? What's the reaction to that?
Well, you know, just to put things in context, there are currently in operation, something in the order of 9,163 cryptocurrencies already in issuance, approximately 200 different stable coins. The proposition that we have worked up addresses, we think, the exact issue that you just raised in the question, because for any DM dollar in issuance, there will be held in reserve, matching 1-for-1 a dollar. So there would be no net new monetary money created. It would be backed 1-for-1. And in addition to that, there would be a very real capital buffer over and above the 1-for-1 pairing of any stablecoin in issuance, so as to ensure complete financial stability of the system that we're operating and the currency itself.
And what about a DM euro?
Well, we'd love to get there at some point. At the moment, as you know, there is a legislative process underway called MiCA, Markets in Crypto Assets, which is the first sort of significant attempt, we think, globally, to create a regulatory framework to deal with either payment usages for crypto assets or indeed investment usage for crypto assets. We welcome the initiative. We think it's an important one. We think that it will be one that other regions and governments will use as a reference point for their own frameworks. And once that framework is settled, which will be a couple of years yet, we imagine that the ECB will be looking at that stage to introduce a digital euro. That appears to be the same timeline that the ECB has outlined. And in that time frame, you know, if there is an opportunity to introduce a euro DM stablecoin, then I'm sure that's something we'd be happy to look at.
Thank you very much. Let's just get some reactions from Ulrik and Per Callesen. This is about competition. Apparently here we have a product that could play a major role, and also maybe one could argue that, well, we don't have that product at the moment. So what's your reaction to that? Ulrik, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can go first, sure. Yeah, I mean, clearly, I mean, that's the way it should be. I mean, if there are certain products where, you know, the banks are not sharp enough, clearly, I mean, there should be new competitors coming in. This is what we see. We have firms like TransferWise exactly also trying to work in this space. And so really the important point for us is that if you end up doing banking-like services, of course, there should also be banking-like regulation. I mean, so it's a level playing field, and the best man should win, clearly. So we have no objections there. I think also a lot of banks would recognize that clearly this area of cross-border, I mean, we have very efficient payment systems in Denmark. But when you go cross-border, it's true, it's not as smooth as the domestic systems we have. So it's a fair point. I think the really, and I'll leave that to Per, but I mean, the really important thing here, if this turns out to be, you know, like doing systemic banking, I mean, clearly you need to think about the regulatory setup. That's really our important point. Thanks.
Per, what's your remark?
No, I mean basically the same. If you walk like a bank and talk like a bank and act like a bank, you should be regulated as a bank. So maybe the question back to Ed, clearly in terms of both financial stability and your own business model, it's you will face exactly the same challenges as the ECB would if they created a deposit account for all citizens. Namely, if that was unlimited, it could have serious repercussions both for you and for the financial system. And that would be something to be monitored extremely closely by financial authorities. In addition, maybe the question how much supplementary banking-like activities would be added to the system in terms of, say, lending, payment services, and the like. You could imagine something would be built which is rather e-money. I think there's been a lot of discussion in Europe if this is not compatible with the e-money directive. E-money is basically a deposit in something which is not really a bank. It's a very limited bank. It is covering its liabilities one by one by investing in short-term, very liquid, safe assets. And for that reason, regulation is much more lean than it is for for a bank. But at some point we probably need to figure out if is it a bank or is it e-money we are talking about. But otherwise, if this can fix a problem which basically is there, I think we should by and large welcome it. But we have to be extremely sharp in ensuring that it's not created unwarranted instability problems. So that's my answer to that.
I'll just give the floor back, Ed, in a couple of seconds, but Christina wanted to have the floor. Christina, over to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that in this area, you could say that China is in front as well, because Ant Group, the big IPO, was cancelled in November, as you're probably very aware. And so you can say that Ant Group is a tech giant acting like a bank, and that's what the Chinese authorities cracked down on, and now they have to restructure the whole thing, and actually they are regulated just like a bank. For many years, the government just turned a blind eye to that, because they needed the innovation, they needed banking opportunity for all the people and all the small businesses who were not served by the big state-owned banks. So I guess that this actually shows that, I mean, yeah, that's the way it will go if it's a bank and not just a currency. That was my comment. Thank you.
Excellent. Over to you, Ed, and obviously also feel free to ask questions to the other panelists. The floor is yours.
Well, I think I'll tackle the central question here, which is, are we behaving like a bank? And the short answer is no. Banks are involved in lending, maturity transformation, market risk activities, and so on. What we're talking about is, as the governor said, effectively e-money. It's like a payment service, and we're very happy to be regulated as that is required to be regulated, and indeed will no doubt exceed any of the stipulations that are placed upon the management of that system. So to Ulrich's point, this isn't walking or talking like a bank. This is basically payment services, and there'll be relatively low volumes of money, I'm sure, sitting in any wallet at any given time. And in a number of markets, there are caps and limits in any event about how much money can sit in a wallet and how much money can be transferred in any given time window, all of which is a very sensible way to manage the risks inherent in those sorts of situations.
Excellent. And Christina, you also raised the overall question that this is security policy. Could you just highlight or say a few more words about that? I mean, how you see this issue as also being very important from a geopolitical perspective.
Yeah, I also saw a question in the comments thread,
yeah.
And definitely this is a big worry for a lot of multinationals who are in China serving the Chinese market. And if they kind of have to be included in this digital renminbi, what do they do in other countries? And can the Chinese government, that is a good question, can the Chinese government use this to gain a certain things that they want to gain? The thing is, I've talked to many experts recently in China and outside China about this, and they all say that they will really cut any chance to make it international yuan if they do this just one time. It's not like shitstorming Nike or H&M like we've just seen in the Chinese market, where they digitally remove these brands from the e-commerce platforms, etc. This is different because people can actually choose. They still have a choice how they want to do their payments and their trade, even though it might be more expensive. If the Chinese government punish governments, multinationals like this just one time, I think it will lose all the credibility that they're trying to build. So, but we'll just have to see. But I'm sure there will be a big trust issue here, and I'm sure that the American government will do a lot to warn all over the world why we should stay away from this digital yuan. And there might be good reasons for that. It's the same question with Huawei. Is it dangerous if they build our 5G infrastructure? Is it dangerous if a Chinese construction company builds a road in Greenland or an airport? It comes down to the same question. And my conclusion so far, being in this small country in Denmark, is that we don't really have a choice. If the American government tells us it's security issue, it's a security issue because we are totally dependent on the US for security.
So the overall point about securitization, as we, at least some of us sort of learned when we went to university, political science, University of Copenhagen, we are almost, our time is almost done here, but do I have any sort of comments, final remarks from you, Ulrik, or Per, or Ed? Sort of a message that you want to say, well, remember this?
I maybe have one reflection or two reflections. One is that there is a kind of trade-off here. Either we limit the amount which is available on these exclusive deposits in central banks and Facebook or Dime or whatever, or we have something unlimited, which is quite scary. But with the given amount, we should reflect also on the efficiency of what happens on that account. You should imagine if you are on the receiving end of a payment, if there is a limit to how much you can score on your deposit account, the extra, the marginal incoming payment might have to be transferred automatically to something else, which will make the system a bit complicated. But then reflection on China as well. Now it's not entirely clear how private the Chinese private banks are, and for that reason, maybe what's going on is not as controversial as it might be in Europe and in the US. But China might find itself with some trouble if they are not introducing any limits also. Would they really appreciate if this becomes a massive success internationally, that deposits from non-financial companies and even financial companies will flow in, boosting their exchange rates to levels which they, at least historically, have not been extremely appreciable about. I think they will face some trouble too. But to my knowledge, they haven't decided, or I simply don't know if there is a constraint on the amount in the deposits they're taking.
Thank you much, Per. Ed, do you have a final sort of message?
Not especially. I mean, I think the Chinese example is an important one. I think the internationalization of the RMB, particularly pre-COVID, was a very real phenomenon. We saw that in my former employer when you look at the activities through the Belt and Road, and they obviously wanted it to be part of the SDR drawing rights under the IMF as well. So it is something to keep an eye on in terms of what's going on there. But I think to the wider point that Christina makes, that the whole of Asia, not just in China, is already at a very advanced state of digitization of their economy, and it is certainly true. You would be very, very lucky if you could ever pay for a cab ride in cash over there anymore.
Ulrik, what's your final sort of statement to us?
Well, I mean, as I said, we want to embrace. I mean, clearly the possibilities should be explored, and hopefully there'll be good answers to these concerns, and we can move forward. As I said, we have had some, I would say, success in developing solutions that make payments quite efficient for the ordinary Dane. So we need to think about, I mean, how can we progress, and if it turns out down the road that there are possibilities down this avenue, or clearly we should go into that, but we need to get these questions solved before we embrace on the project in practice.
And that was our attempt here, at least to start that overall discussion. So thank you very much, Ed. Thanks, Ulrik. Thank you very much, Per, and obviously also Christina for joining us. And thank you to all of you for spending this hour with us. This was our second so-called Euroflash. The first one we had was on HERA, so whether the EU should have sort of an agency sort of combating pandemics. This one was on digital euro and the overall system. And on the 20th of May, you will be able to tune in again and listen also to a very, very important debate about whether we are sort of now approaching a digital tax, with the new president of the United States having launched this overall discussion within both the EU and obviously also the OECD. So please be back on the 20th of May, follow our website, and you can also access this webinar afterwards there. I think on Monday, if Ulrik and all the others will be able to put it on there, that'll be great. Thank you very much. Have a nice weekend and enjoy the sun over there, Ed.